Hi, everybody. My name's Julia, and I'm on the marketing team at Freightos. We're really excited to have you here for this Red Sea crisis update. International shipping can be fraught with challenges at the best of times, but right now, with the continued Red Sea crisis, we want to ensure you remain up to date with the latest data and insights and how they impact the current freight trend. This website will be cut into 3 parts. We'll begin with Judah, our head of research, who'll give an update on all the latest developments. And then we'll pass to Eliana, our director of sales, to give a brief overview of Freightos Terminal and how it helps logistic professionals deal with the fluctuations of international freight. And then lastly, we'll have a short Q&A. So if you have a question at any point, simply click the Q&A button to add it to the list. Okay, that's it from me. I'm going to hand it over to Judah.
Great. Thanks, Julia. Welcome, everyone. We're going to say a quick word about Freightos before we get going. So Freightos is a global freight booking and payment platform. And we connect dozens of forwarders with thousands of shippers to search, book, pay, and manage their shipments through the Freightos.com marketplace. We also connect forwarders with carriers through the web cargo e-booking and payment platform and other SaaS solutions, and provide market intelligence and insights, including the Freightos Baltic Index, the Freightos Air Index, and other customized data solutions through our Freightos Data and Freightos Terminal, to which we're going to be referring throughout the next half hour. Okay, if we jump right in. So as we probably know, Houthi attacks from Yemen on Red Sea vessels in opposition to Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza started back in mid-November. First, the targets were only Israeli-owned vessels, and then later vessels that were going to stop to or from Israeli ports. Although there have been attacks since then on other vessels with no obvious ties to Israel. An international force led by the U.S. was formed in late December, but even after ultimatums from the U.S. and the U.K., as well as other nations, that if the attacks continues, this force will shift from just protecting vessels to a more proactive approach and attacking or targeting Houthi targets positions in Yemen. Attacks continued. Since then, and just in the last week or so, the U.S. and the U.K. have targeted Houthi positions, dozens of Houthi positions actually in Yemen, and attacks on vessels have continued nonetheless, including up to the last couple of days. And the kind of the stated scope of the Houthis' targets have now expanded to include U.S. and U.K. commercial and naval vessels, and some missiles have targeted U.S. naval vessels just recently. So with this, by mid-December, there were widespread diversions in terms of the container carriers from most of the largest container carriers. With the naval force in position, Maersk tried to return to the Red Sea, given that there would be this protection or possibly additional security because of this coalition. One of their vessels was soon after hit by a missile, and then they suspended their transits again. There are reports of some of these vessels by some of these major carriers that are here and there still going through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal with kind of naval escorts. But for the most part, these major carriers are diverting and are continuing to divert. So these diversions represent, for the carriers who have announced that they are suspending Red Sea transits, represent 60% of the total industry capacity. And this means millions of TEU worth of capacity have actually been diverted from the Suez. And again, the Red Sea and the Suez are kind of the standard route for traffic from Asia to North Europe, and from Asia to the Mediterranean, as well as some Asia to the U.S. East Coast volumes. As the attacks have continued, or the situation there has intensified and escalated, insurance premiums have also increased significantly for vessels that still want to transit in the Red Sea. So recent reports have said that some premiums have increased about 1% of vessel values, which is extremely expensive, which might present a barrier from carriers who are still transiting to continue to transit, as you'll have those costs plus the Suez Canal fees. And the big diversions have come from the container carriers initially. BP earlier on had announced that they were diverting their gas and oil carriers, and now just in the last few days we've heard of more significant diversions also from other sectors like oil and natural gas carriers, some bulk, and also some roll-on, roll-off or car carriers. So this diversion means longer routes it means the carriers need more vessels to service the same number of volumes, as they will add vessels to these services or to these loops, so that they can keep to departure schedules. And therefore, it also means higher costs to carriers in the form of additional fuel and the form of additional vessels. So what kind of impact is it having? So of course, first of all, it's longer lead times. Depending on the destination, it adds 7 to 14 days of additional transit times, the most to the Mediterranean, and a little bit less to North America or to North Europe. In addition, it also means that the possibility of some port congestion and tightening capacity. So port congestion can result from vessels coming off schedule and arriving, missing their slot and arriving more than one at a time, which means someone's going to wait and sit there and tie up capacity. It could also mean that some carriers are going to be skipping port calls and offloading containers in more significant hubs, which can cause additional port congestion or higher density on those container yards. Although these are likely to even out after kind of the transitional period we're in now, as we're still kind of in the first weeks of these major diversions. And in fact, we're not hearing about very significant congestion in North European hubs or big ports just yet. It can also mean tightening capacity because, as we said, vessels are tied up in longer journeys. That in itself is a constraint on capacity. And when the vessels are delayed arriving or departing, this can also be felt as less available capacity leaving when you need it in the market. Some carriers are adding extra loaders or activating new vessels to take additional departure dates to address the shortfall. We've also seen starting to see reports of available capacity, available space getting tight, especially just now at Asian origin ports, export hubs. We've also heard of some long-term contract shippers with long-term ocean contracts. First of all, paying surcharges, but also possibly not getting all their contracted volumes moved as spot rates increase. In addition, we're also seeing the beginning of empty container shortages. So again, because of these longer voyages, hundreds of thousands of TEU worth of empty containers are not getting back to Asian origin ports as soon as they were meant to. We're starting to see reports of certain container types being unavailable at, as I said, at Asian origin ports. And this will have a knock-on effect to other Asian export lanes, even those that don't use the Suez, like Asia to North America West Coast, as well as just a general tightening equipment and availability, even for non-Asian lanes, as more capacity is moved to this lane. So of course, this has meant spiking spot rates, as we'll see in more detail shortly. This has come in the form of GRIs and a surge of really all different types of surcharges to address the longer voyages, the higher costs, the equipment imbalance, and all these other things. We've seen backhaul rates increase as well. There's also been kind of expressed concerns that some exports on the backhaul lanes won't be picked up, which is something we saw during the pandemic, because when spot rates on head haul are spiking, then there's a rush to get empty containers back because of that more lucrative lane, which sometimes can impact backhaul shippers. Okay, so these are the factors that are going to last for a while as long as diversions continue. But it's important to keep really two things in mind about what we're looking at right now that will likely mean that the next few weeks will be the worst, but should improve after that. So the first factor is that carriers are still adjusting to this change. So first of all, they're still dealing with some vessels that had diverted, midway on their way to the Red Sea, and then had to divert and have a much longer journey. And so some of these are arriving late, and therefore they're returning late. But we're also, as I said, still in this transition period to this new reality. So carriers do have a lot of excess capacity. Before the Red Sea crisis, the big kind of story or potential driver in terms of the ocean container market was the overcapacity. Ocean carriers had ordered a record large order book of new vessels over the course of the pandemic, as their profits had skyrocketed and they were investing in new capacity. And as demand was kind of evening out and coming down from the pandemic levels, we're really entering an environment of overcapacity, which is going to be a challenge to carriers to keep rates up, Now we have something that requires additional capacity, and that capacity likely exists in the market. But it takes some time to get those vessels in position, either activating idled vessels, moving vessels from one lane to the other. In some cases, we're seeing carriers chartering vessels because even if on the overall market level capacity is in excess, it's not necessarily true for individual carriers or services. So this is also going to take time to get these vessels in position, get them integrated into the loops, and therefore keep better to departure schedules, and also even out arrival schedules, so we don't have vessel bunching or arrivals or vessels arriving at the same time. The second factor right now in the short term is that we're in an environment of increased demand because we're just a couple weeks out from Lunar New Year. During the Lunar New Year in China, a lot of manufacturing and a lot of logistics slows down or shuts down completely, which means that shippers are eager to pull those 2-3 weeks of the holiday period demand for those 2-3 weeks ahead to the weeks before the holiday, which we're entering right now, the last couple of weeks of January, as the holiday starts on February 10th. And that can kind of extend to just after the holiday as well, as there's some clearing of backlogs or shipments that didn't come out. So we're in a bit of an increase of demand period, which just adds pressure to these kind of disruptions that we were talking about before, which was tight capacity because demand is higher, and also equipment shortages. If empty containers were lower than typical, but we were in a low demand environment, it would be felt less. So it's very likely that after the Lunar New Year period, and maybe an additional couple weeks as carriers get these additional vessels into position, that we'll start to see an easing of some of these factors. Though of course transit times will remain longer and freight rates will remain above the norm, but it's possible that these types of disruptions will subside somewhat afterwards. Okay, so what does all this look like in terms of freight rates? Now we're going to turn to our Freightos terminal and look at our Freightos Baltic Index of 40-foot ocean containers. These are spot rates. And here we're starting with Asia to North America. So we can see that these are in green, we're looking at Asia to North America West Coast, and in blue, we're looking at Asia to North America East Coast. And we can see that before the diversions, or just after the diversion started, but before the close of 2023, we saw our rates were level. But then we can see, and this is true of other lanes as well, we can see if we look at our market feed for price increases, we can see that there's just a surge of announcements of general rate increases and surcharges, and not just for these lanes. This is true of the other lanes we'll look at as well. But with in the second half of December, there were a lot of announcements of all different types of surcharges that would be introduced at the beginning of the year, and then again mid-month as these type of increases get rolled out. So we saw a significant increase to start the year, and then another significant increase just now as we hit mid-month, and these are starting to roll out and be recognized. So we see here that we see rates increasing, and in terms of surcharges, these rates include the base rates, which rise with general rate increases, but also the different types of surcharges, and surcharges not necessarily on the Trans-Pacific, but across a lot of different lanes, but certainly to the East Coast and more so to the Mediterranean and North Europe. There are surcharges ranging from $500 to $1,500 to $2,000 per container, which again are being rolled out gradually and are going to continue in the coming weeks. So if we look at the East Coast, we can see that rates increase from about $2,500 now up to past $5,000 per container. To the West Coast, which isn't directly impacted by the Suez diversions, but so we're seeing rates increase there as well. So they've climbed from $1,700 up to $3,200. So the fact that rates are increasing on lanes not directly impacted, for the West Coast specifically, this might be some shift of volumes that would have gone to the East Coast, that now shippers are preferring the West Coast to avoid these diversions and to avoid some of the impacts of not transiting in the Red Sea. On the other hand, we'll see increases on other lanes not related at all. Like on the transatlantic, we say rates are extremely low right now. They're about $1,200 per container, but there are announcements of a GRI of up to about $5,000 per container for February. So this might reflect kind of a general tightness of capacity. as well as a shifting of capacity to other lanes. So first of all, kind of equipment availability could impact lanes that aren't directly associated with the Red Sea. But secondly, if carriers are moving capacity from some lanes to the others, then that would cause rates to increase on those lanes where capacity is being moved away. And this indeed is something we saw during the pandemic. Initially, rates increased on the transatlantic, even though this wasn't really related to the big surge in imports and container volumes, which are really going from Asia to North America. But if carriers are moving vessels away from the transatlantic, that's going to push rates up there as well. If we look now to Asia, North Europe, and Asia Mediterranean rates, we see a similar story, but maybe to a bigger degree. For Asia North Europe, we see that Asia to North Europe is in pink, and Asia to Mediterranean is in purple. So for Asia Europe, we see rates increase from about $2,400 to about $5,800 per container. I'm sorry, from $1,600 up to $5,800 per container, and even more so to the Mediterranean, where rates were at $2,400, and again increased to start the year, and again now mid-month they're going even higher, are now almost at $7,000 per container, which is very elevated. And of course, Asia to Mediterranean has the most additional distance to go around the continent of Africa and then all the way in the Mediterranean. So it makes sense that we're seeing those there. So as we said, these are extending not just to these lanes, but also to some of the other lanes as well, where there are a lot of surcharges varying in degree, but being introduced just across the board as kind of capacity and equipment is getting tight across the industry. So if we compare these rates to 2019, they're of course elevated. Asia to North America are only about 40% higher, so quote unquote 40%, as kind of they're not as dependent on the Red Sea or the Suez as Asia to North Europe and Mediterranean are. For Asia to North Europe, this is about 3 times higher than 2019, and to the Mediterranean is about double than 2019. If we do compare, we can look at all the links together now. If we do compare what's going on now to what happened during the pandemic, though, we can kind of describe why these are different. So here we're seeing these rate increases now, and they're quite significant, but we see they're not getting anywhere near the kind of increases that we saw, at least yet, during the pandemic. Here we have rates to Asia and from Asia to North Europe and Mediterranean of about $15,000 per container. To North America, rates went higher than $20,000 per container. And really, I think that it's likely that rates won't go up to those levels or much past, maybe $8,000 or maybe past $8,000, but not to levels we saw during the pandemic, because I think operationally we're not heading to that same degree of disruption. So the pandemic disruptions were really driven by an unrelenting surge in demand and volumes that really overwhelmed ports and caused a lot of congestion, especially in the U.S. West Coast and also in some hubs in North Europe. And that really tied up capacity, and there was no good answer or solution to it until the market just had to wait for demand to ease and backlogs to get cleared. This time, however, it's not really demand driven, given that overall kind of overcapacity that we're talking about in terms of vessels in the container market. Carriers should be able to use these to address those longer voyages and keep containers flowing. So then once they do, yes, shippers will still be facing longer transit times, but these should become predictable and more stable as we get past the Lunar New Year, as opposed to the uncertainty and kind of fluctuating reports of ETAs that we're hearing now. And this isn't going to be a problem that should keep compounding upon itself, which is what we had during the pandemic. And also, as we said, once we get post the Lunar New Year period and once this routine is established, rates will likely remain elevated above the norm, because carriers are still facing these higher costs. But they should come down from what we'll likely be seeing in the next few weeks as the demand push comes down a little bit. Okay, if we quickly look at air cargo rates. So turning to air, here we're looking at in pink, we're looking at China to North America, and in green, China to North Europe. Now, there has been an expectation that because of ocean delays and increasing costs, that this will push some ocean volumes to air or to sea air. But so far, we haven't really seen this materialize either in reports from forwarders where we've heard reports of interest in these type of options, but also not in terms of rate behavior. So as we can see, Asia to China to North America rates have really been quite level or come down a bit from their peak season period, but are now about $5 per kilo, which is elevated, but not due to the Red Sea situation. And for Europe, we saw something similar. We saw an increase during peak season, kind of a decline in the second half of December, which is also kind of typical seasonal. We've seen some rebound, but again, they're not. We don't see rates spiking just yet. And if we look at kind of the sea air options, which would go sea to the Middle East, a lot would go through Dubai, and then continue on to North America or Europe. Likewise, we're not seeing increases just yet. We're seeing rates really quite level. So that's kind of what we're seeing for now. As I said, in air cargo, if there would be some kind of strong impact, we would expect it in the next couple of weeks ahead of Lunar New Year, and kind of less pressure afterwards. So that's what we're seeing now. In some, I would say, we're seeing diversions, we're seeing an impact, we're seeing an impact on rates. Well, likely these should subside as we get past the Lunar New Year period, but they will likely persist in some form until we get traffic flowing once again through the Red Sea. So with that, I'll hand off to Aliona, who's going to talk about how shippers and other logistics stakeholders are using new and better access to freight data to make better decisions anytime, but certainly as we face some of these more significant disruptions. I hope I left you enough time.
There we go. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for this very insightful update, Judah. I see that we already have a lot of questions and a lot of interest regarding what's happening exactly. I would like to give you a little bit of an insight of where you could find this information. Not everybody can be as skillful as Judah and jumping from graph to graph and insight to insight as professional as he does. But nevertheless, with Freightos Terminal, you can actually find a lot of this information, which could actually ease a lot of your pain points, which would ease a lot of your strategic decision making, whether you are handling supply chains, whether you're researching them, writing about them, or you're servicing your clients to help them move their cargo. For Freightos Terminal, which is our updated platform that we just launched last year, all you have to do is to go to terminal.freightos.com, click the sign up button here, and you will get free access to what is available on the platform today. In the interest of the time, I will just show you a couple of highlights and where we see our partners and our customers finding the biggest value. But that being said, everything you see on my screen can be available to you. We have different information access levels depending on your subscription types. One of the questions that we just received, for instance, is why the information only updated weekly and not daily. From our perspective, actually, all of the databases are updated hourly. All of the data that comes into terminal is transactional. It's based on real-time quotes and bookings on ocean and air both. And depending on your subscription type, you can actually get access to daily updates. And you can also get access not only to one price point, but the full market disclosure. So what do we see here? When you first land on the website, you see a few bars available right here. FBX stands for our Freightos Baltic Index that Judah refers to quite frequently. You will see a few predetermined trade lanes based on region to region, where we have picked a selection of ports at origin and destination, and we give you the pricing, transit time, events, and trends information for that combination of ports specifically. Here, for instance, to be a bit complementary to all the US information, I picked China, East Asia to North Europe, where you can see the pricing point. Depending on your subscription level, you can go back in history as early as 2016. Here, if we look at the 3 months history, for instance, same as Judah was showcasing, we can actually see the specific market events related to this trade lane and impacting this peak in pricing right here. The key events tab is available here. Whenever you click on it, it will be popping up with the information specifically for this trade lane, and you will be able to filter it by priority, by the event type. You can also help to train our model by voting whether or not you found this information useful. Other than that, you will see a general percentage number associated with each trade lane to show you what is the percentage of increase or decrease for rates on this trade lane. You will also see the volatility of this trade lane within the period of time that you are looking at, where here 2.4 out of 10 maximum is pretty volatile, as you can see. We also show you information about the transit time on this trade lane. It goes between 32 days up to 52 days currently. And you can see year-on-year price comparison. When you were looking at Judah's report, you saw that he was also talking about the air freight information based on our FAX air freight index, where instead of showing you prices for a 40-foot container, we can show you prices for the air freight by weight break. We have many more regions here. There's many more combinations for origin and destination between airports rather than for the ocean ports. So for instance, if we pick Europe as origin and look at Europe to North America, we can see and choose the weight break that we are specifically interested in, from 100 kilos all the way up to 3,000. Once again, depending on your subscription type, you can see the history, the latest or the full year, and how the prices are changing. The key events relevant specifically to this trade lane and to this mode of transport also can be pulled up. And the information regarding the freight price range from minimum to maximum and year-over-year pricing trends. You see here, for instance, for air freight, the weather is one of the seasonally important factors right now, which could be impacting the capacity, the prices, and the transit times. If you want to look at something a little bit more specific, which is much more relevant for people that actually need to work for international shipping, for handling supply chains, for making decisions, for tackling risks, for mitigating crisis, you probably wonder, what about India? What about other container types? What about specific port-to-port, airport information? This you will find here under My Routes icon, where you can design your own trade lane and keep track of your own lanes thanks to this tool. We have an air option where you can choose your airports of origin and destination, and you can specify exact weight break that you want to keep track of for your pricing. You can add another lane if necessary and look in both and compare them. The same is available for ocean, where you can actually find complementary information that, for instance, India, that is not included in our official FBX indices, you can create your own lanes considering India, considering Latin America, considering intra-Asia. So we had a question regarding that. So this My Routes option gives you not only one standard price for 40-foot container, you can choose your container type, you can combine origin and destinations as you see best fit for your logistics and for your supply chains, and you will see not only one price, but here, let me show you the latest. You will actually have a possibility to see all the price range for that container type on that lane from minimum to maximum. Keep track of the port performance. For instance, here we can see what is the anchoring time, berthing time, or congestion in Chennai on India side, all of the key events relevant to it, and transit time compared equally so. If you have any questions regarding how to sign up, how to use, how to get access to more features, please feel free to reach out to anybody on the terminal at freightos.com. We'll be happy to give you a free trial. We'll be happy to walk you through the platform, make sure you find the features and functionality that fit you best. And here I will be handing back over to Julia. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. That was super interesting. Okay, I'm very conscious of time. So what I will say for everyone that's submitted a question, we will get in touch with you after the webinar via your email and answer your question that way. So don't worry, we've got them all saved and we will reply to each one individually. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope you found it really helpful and useful. If anybody wants more information about Freightos Terminal, like Eliana said, you can leave your email address in the Q&A box and we will be in touch with you. And thank you and have a great rest of the day.